to What Are You Reading? We're the celebrity talk show where the books are the celebrities, and with me right now is Paul Betit. Thanks, Paul, for being on the show. And you've written 3 books.
I have.
They're mysteries, and the main character is John Murphy.
Exactly.
He is a Vietnam vet.
Yes.
And military intelligence. Tell us about how you came up with that character.
Well, he's a CID operative, a criminal investigation division, which is basically the private detectives of the Army.
Okay.
So I came up with him because I had business with them when I was in the service.
Okay, so you are a Vietnam vet?
I am a Vietnam vet. My first book that I wrote takes place at most of the action takes place at where I was stationed.
I see.
And I went to all the places.
So like Mark Twain, you write about what you know.
I do write about what I know, and that's why it took me so long to figure out, because I didn't know anything.
And by the way, your first book is Kang Nu Station.
That's actually the first book that I wrote.
Yes, right.
This is the first book that I published.
And Phu Bai.
Phu Bai.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and we'll talk about these, and then we'll get to your third and most recent book.
Sure.
John Murphy is the continuing character in all of these.
All 3 of these books.
So, tell me a little bit about John Murphy. What kind of guy is he?
Well, John is a young man from a young soldier, a career soldier from Cape Cod, and he would be these are in some ways police procedurals, except they happen in very unique and exotic locations, these books. But he's a detective who follows his intuition. In the first book, we meet his mentor, Phu Bai, who teaches him the finer points of investigative work, research, how to question, interrogate, suspects, but he's someone who follows his nose and is not afraid to leap to a conclusion, or at least follow a trail.
Now, do you have other continuing characters in the 3 books? Does he have like office mates, or does he have a woman of interest in the?
There is a woman of interest, not so much in the first book, but she pops up in the second too. And in the first one, my Vietnam experience didn't include very many. There weren't very many women in Vietnam, that I had anything to do with, and it's a book that's heavily populated by males.
Right.
There are references to women who do exist.
Right.
Elsewhere.
Right.
And actually, in one case, there's a phone call made from Vietnam back to a gal.
Now, it sounds like you had some fun writing these stories. This was a pleasurable experience for you.
It was. It started off as a hobby. I'm a professional writer.
Okay. Newspaper person.
Newspaper person,
sure.
Right? For nearly 40 years, and I just wanted to do something else, a different kind of writing. In the newspaper work, when you write and when you quote somebody, it has to be exactly what they said. In this case, I can.
You had the wonderful world of fiction.
I did.
You could make the story go any way you wanted to.
I did, and that's liberating in a way, and it is quite different from what I do.
And coming from the newspaper background, you already had that discipline of setting down to the typewriter, now the keyboard, and getting the project done, or setting your mind to it. So you had that going for you.
I had that going for me, but I didn't have very much time, and I had to develop a regimen, because it was you're told you're supposed to write every day. Well, I do write every day. Unfortunately, not necessarily on my books. So I would have to develop a regimen, so when I did write, that I wasn't wasting any time, and I was making the time more efficiently. So basically, I wouldn't sit down to work on a book unless I knew I had 90 minutes of unfettered time where there would be no distractions. I wouldn't sit down and write unless I knew exactly what I was going to write about, not so much what I was going to actually write, but where I was going. And then I wouldn't finish writing until I knew get a thought about what I was going to do next. If I was going to be some research involved, I would write snippets of dialogue that was going to happen, or maybe 2 or 3 chapters down the road, and I would sort of basically push the book along. And sometimes I maybe could write a couple of times a week. Sometimes I'd have to skip a week because I'm busy on a newspaper assignment. But it is, I won't say it's a slog, but you have to develop a regimen for doing it. I think.
Right. You know, and just changing direction a little bit, taking place in Vietnam, and one takes place in East Africa. So you've got some nice locations, and you've got some exotic locations for particularly Mainers to escape to.
Right, and there were 2 places that I spent a lot of time in. I was in Vietnam for 16 months. I stayed an extra 4 months, and I was in Ethiopia for nearly 2 years. And so there were experiences in both cases. I won't say it's life-changing, but they were certainly life-enhancing in the experiences I had there. And some of the experiences are in these books, embellished a little bit, and maybe, in this Cagnew Station book, there was a motorcycle accident. Well, I had one.
So the wonderful world of fiction, we can pump it up a little bit and make it more entertaining.
Exactly.
Make it the second time around. We're talking with Paul Betit, and his books are the first one published, Flew By, and Cagnew Station, and then your newest one, The Man in the Canal.
Right.
These all feature John Murphy. You're listening to What Are You Reading? And we'll be right back. Welcome back to What Are You Reading? We're the celebrity talk show where the books are the celebrities, and we've been talking with Paul Betit about his 3 new books, the most recent one being The Man in the Canal. And Paul, your first 2 books take place one in Vietnam, one in Ethiopia. This one is a little bit different. The Man in the Canal, some of the action takes place in Sweden. And
all of it, as a matter of fact.
Okay, all of it. Tell us a little bit about this book and how you came up with this particular storyline and thought.
Well, the first 2 books were written in locales that I had a lot of experience with. I spent 16 months in Vietnam, and then I spent almost 2 years in Ethiopia after Vietnam. And they're all Vietnam connected in a way. One, the Phu Bai, takes place in Vietnam. The second one takes place about a year later, and Vietnam is very much, in 1968, is very much in the forefront of a lot of soldiers' minds. At that point, a lot of soldiers did want to go. And the third one deals with, it takes place in 1971, and it touches upon the phenomenon of American soldiers basically leaving their units and seeking refuge in Sweden. Leaving just basically not traitors, but they're
yes.
They were. So it takes place in that milieu where he's gone undercover. John Murphy's gone undercover to find a murderer who is supposedly hiding out among these soldiers and sailors and Marines who went to Sweden rather than go to Vietnam.
Now, as a mystery writer, there seems to be 2 schools of thought on how stories evolve. Are you the type of mystery writer who sits down and you know pretty much the whole story before you start the project? Or are you one of those that says, well, I have these characters and I see where the characters are going to take me, and you kind of do it that way?
I've done it both ways.
Okay.
This one here, I wrote the ending to this book probably 5 years ago. This book was finished just recently, 2 months ago. That I actually.
We're talking about The Man in the Canal.
Man in the Canal. So I had a starting point and I had an ending point. I knew how it was going to end. I know who was going to do what, basically at the end, and I had to figure out a way to get from point A follow a very circuitous route to point B. So in this genre, you're right, I work in this genre. I can pretty much work with an outline, but I found that sometimes what will happen is that pieces that I thought were going to be one chapters ended up becoming 2 or 3 chapters, or some chapters and a couple of chapters in Vietnam don't even. I took them out.
Do you find that you've ever had to change the ending, or that you've after you've worked with some of the characters or some of the situations, some of the parts of the book the movable parts of the story? Do you ever find that the ending gets changed, or that major renovations take place because of what you've got in front of you?
I do. There's a scene in this book where I introduce the bad guy to the readers for the first time, and there's an element in there involving sparrows.
Right.
I'm not going to tell you what he does with the sparrows, but originally those sparrows were 75 pages in front of where they ended up being, and as I was that chapter was evolving, I said I just needed something to maybe underline just how bad this guy was. So I moved those birds and gave him a different purpose than they had originally. Just moved them someplace. So it's sometimes it's not backfilling, but you find that it's just something that you can make better use of elsewhere.
And and because everybody loves mysteries, and they're such a popular genre. Do you find when you're writing something, you say, "Oh my goodness, this is territory that's been covered so much by this author or that author," or you can't find a new phrase. You just use the term "bad guys," and we're always. It seems like it's such a well-trodden territory. Do you ever find yourself saying, "Oh my goodness, I've got to find a new way to tell the same plot"?
Well, it's funny
story.
that you should bring that up. Is that I don't say that's a bad guy.
Yeah.
I let the reader decide if he's a bad guy. I don't ever say bad guy. These books, I think, are actually hybrids. They're not straight mysteries. One of the books, Cagnew Station, for instance, he has to solve a crime in which he can't share the solution with anybody. It has to appear to be another solution other than what it really is. So they're not really. And I think I told you before we talked that he's not the one that actually ends up maybe delivering the coup de grace every time.
Right. Well, it's certainly interesting. 3 great books. With featuring John Murphy, the protagonist, and we have Fubai, Cagnew Station, and The Man in the Canal, and they're all available online. They're
available on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com as both softcover and as ebooks. They're available through order. Go to your bookstore, ask them if you want to get a book by Paul Betit.
Okay.
And people can visit my website, paulbetit.com, and write me, and I'll tell them how they can get my books doing.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. Good luck with the books.
Thank you.
And you are watching What Are You Reading?